Hi, everybody. Lawyer Autumn Whitboard here. Welcome to our latest episode in our series on legal for particular types of business. Today, we are starting to wrap up the series with an episode on photographers and videographers. So if this is you, you are in the right place. I'm guessing your images are stunning. You are having clients who are flocking to you, wanting you to either create videos or photos for them. Even during a pandemic, I'm still seeing people updating their branding. Weddings are still happening, even though they might be a little bit different. So if this is you, I want you to be sure that you are prepared for what comes next as your business grows, because you will start to come upon some questions that come with selling and delivering photography and videography services. Here are a couple examples. How can you make sure that your clients and you are on the same page from the beginning about things like how long you're going to shoot them on the day of their mini session or their event or for their branding shoot? Is their deposit refundable? What happens with canceling and rescheduling? And if they just don't want to go forward at all, or if you get sick? What happens if they're late? What if you've got back-to-back sessions booked and it just throws your whole day off? We're going to talk about all of that today. We're also going to touch on what might come up if you're using models. So let's say either you're creating images for your website or for marketing, or maybe you're collaborating with other people on a branded photo shoot or a styled shoot. So how does that work, working with models? And then we will wrap up with the legal that every online business needs, which is making sure that your website is correct, is legally legit. There are some special considerations for photographers, though. So if you've listened to some of our past episodes, if you are in the photography or videography game, stay tuned, because this episode is really for you. So whether you are doing family or lifestyle shoots, if you're a wedding photographer, wedding videographer, if you're doing branding, or if you're commercial photography, maybe do catalog or more commercial type shoots, this is all for you. So stay tuned. I'll start with my standard disclaimer, which is I am a lawyer. I'm licensed to practice in Tennessee, but everything in this episode is just information. It is not legal advice. So I want to get your wheels turning. I want to get you thinking about what issues you might face, what problems might come up, but this is just your starting point. This is not legal advice. So please check with your own lawyer, whether that's our firm or someone else, to make sure you're getting the right advice for your business. Show notes for this episode and every episode are on our website at awbfirm.com/podcast. This is episode 161. So those are at awbfirm.com/podcast 161. You can find our free resource that goes with this episode, which is our 10-step checklist to make sure that your entire business is legally protected. So this is especially important for photographers. All right, so let's dive in. We are going to start off where I often start off, no matter what kind of business you have. I always look at how you're making money. What are your revenue streams? And for photographers, it's shoots mostly. If you have an online course or you're selling digital products or something, listen to the other episodes on that. We're really talking in this episode about your one-on-one services, your client services. So your client agreement is going to be key. I'm going to go through some different considerations that you may want to think about for the different kinds of ways that you're shooting or the different kinds of client engagements you may be working on. So the first one is the simplest. Let's start with the mini session. You want this agreement to be short and sweet, but I don't want you to skip it. I think a lot of photographers for their mini sessions, they just think, oh, I don't need an agreement at all. I'll just, it's a 30-minute shoot and I deliver 10-minute images. I'm done. I would encourage you that even with mini sessions, things can go wrong. There can be misunderstandings. So I want you to make sure that you are using a short and sweet agreement, even for your mini sessions. And this is something you can load on your website. You can have people, check a box that they agree if you have a checkout procedure on your website, or you can have it, there at the mini session for them to sign on the day. There's lots of easy ways that you can do this. But I still want you using an agreement. There can still be issues that come up. And the way we prevent those is by using an agreement, going over it with the client so that everyone is on the same page. So here are the issues that I see come up with mini sessions. And actually right before a pandemic, I was going to do a really fun collaboration. I was going to do a workshop with a local photographer, and that got put on the shelf because no one's gathering at all. And I'm sad that that didn't happen, but we talked about a lot of the things that come up with her clients, and I actually revamped our templates after having that conversation with her. We already had solid templates, I thought, but I was able to kind of take some of her feedback, and she actually trains other photographers. I'll include a link to her. She's a Chattanooga-based photographer, but she does travel. I'll include a link to that in the show notes in case you're curious. But we put out a new mini session template, and I revamped our photographer and videographer template after hearing some of her feedback and incorporating some additional issues that she talked about. So here are some things you might face and that are covered. No pressure to buy, but if you are listening and you think, gosh, these are really scary, don't worry, they're covered in our templates at our website. So with your mini session, again, this can be a short and sweet agreement. It doesn't have to be complicated, but you want to have your price. You want to have terms around, do you require a deposit to book? I think a lot of times for mini sessions, people just accept payment on the day, but that can get tricky if people cancel or no show. So if you have a deposit, what are your terms around that? If the other payment is required on the day, how is that handled? Or do you send an invoice? Again, there's no rules around how you have to do this. It's up to you and your business, but I want to make sure that it's clear so everyone knows what to expect. That's our goal with all agreements. You want to spell out very clearly if you are guaranteeing a number of images. A lot of photographers will say for a mini session, it's 10 images or 20 images. If that's what your package is, whatever your package is, you want it spelled out clearly. Are there, do you give them all the files, but you agree you'll edit the 10 best ones, or, however that is going to work. Whatever your package is, you want it spelled out very clearly. And then if you do have any deliverables, so sometimes, especially around the holidays, we're getting into the fall photography session with people wanting to get new pictures for their Christmas cards. If you have any deliverables that are part of your package, do you provide, a certain number of printed cards, or are those available to order through you that you'll design and print? Or do you do a little mini photo album, a hard copy? Or any other kinds of products or physical items. You want to spell that out very clearly so people know what they're getting. Of course, if your mini session is time limited, which a lot of them are, you want to have the length of the session. We have a local photographer here that we've used that some of her sessions are as short as 10 minutes. And I will tell you, when my kiddos were little, they're a little bigger now. They have a little bit more patience. But when they were little, honestly, 10 minutes was great. And she would just snap away. She was really fast. And that was great. So if you do have, especially if you have very short sessions like that, you want to make sure that the length of the session is very clear. And then what are your session procedures? There are a million different ways you can set this up, and you probably have some lessons learned if you've been photographing or doing video for a while. What happens if the people are late? Especially for mini sessions, you're often scheduled back to back with not a lot of breaks or not a lot of wiggle room in case people are late. Will you push other people late, or will you just squeeze them in at another time? Do they have to wait on you to have another opening? Things happen, so you might consider some padding in your schedule. But you want to spell that out so people know what happens. And then what happens if someone needs to cancel? Let's say a kid wakes up sick. What happens if they need to reschedule? What if the weather's bad? I live in beautiful Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we have a lot of really beautiful outdoor photography sites that people love to use. Natural light is so beautiful in photos and videos. So what happens if it's raining that day? Are you going to reschedule? Do you have a backup rain date? How does that work? And then what happens if the client is a no-show? Do you do a refund? Do you reschedule? Or is it just you're out of luck? So all of your session procedures, you may have other things that I didn't mention that are really important to you. So think about that. Who owns the rights in the images? So I know with a mini session, often what people are looking for are just, some family photos to use on social media, share with friends, put in an album, put on a Christmas card. But do you have any restrictions around, do you want to own the images, the copyrights in the images? Are you transferring those copyrights to the client? Are there any restrictions around how they can use it? Are you okay if they put it on a billboard? Are you okay if they use it in their business, on their website? I have some family pictures on the AWB firm website. If you have any restrictions around that, you just want to make that very clear. It's up to you how you want to handle that. For mini sessions, I find the stakes are a little bit lower because it is just usually, some quick family snapshots usually. And then if you, the photographer or videographer, want to use any of the images or footage in your portfolio, so this is for your marketing purposes, either on your website or sending out to potential clients, you need to get that permission from the client in your agreement. So usually this is going to look like, excuse me, frog in my throat. Usually this will be what we call a model release, which I'll go over in a little bit more detail later. That gives you the permission to use their image, their likeness, their face, their recognizable image. And it basically it gives them a heads up that, you know, you may be scrolling through Instagram and you may see your picture being used to advertise the photographer, or you may see it elsewhere. So all of that needs to be very clearly spelled out if you want to use the images in your portfolio or for marketing, advertising purposes. But that's really it for a mini session. It's not super complicated. It doesn't have to be a really long agreement. And especially if your procedures are pretty simple, you can get this down to, you know, probably a page or two. Not super complicated, but I still want you to use an agreement. All right, so let's shift and talk about my wedding photographers and videographers. Now, you're going to want to include everything I just talked about. So those are all going to, all going to transfer over. All of those same issues are going to continue, but because it is more money, more time, more stress, more, excitement, everybody wants to make sure that the images from their wedding are perfect. You're going to want to have some additional terms in there. So one thing that comes up is what happens if the bride and groom or the family wants for you to stay longer? Let's say you agree to an 8-hour day, you've done the getting ready pictures, the ceremony, the reception, but they are really having a blast and they want you to stay all the way through, maybe they're off the timeline, who knows? Is that an option? Will you do extra time? And if so, what's the fee? Hopefully you would charge for that. We don't want to just add on things to the package with no fee. But you want to give them that heads up so that if that comes up, you're kind of prepared, you're ready, everybody's agreed what it's going to look like. This is something interesting. We actually work with a couple of event planners and venues, and this is something that has come up kind of across the board, which is what happens if you have a rude guest or even a family member or the bride and groom? What happens if, as a service provider, as a photographer or videographer, someone is being rude to you or is harassing you? Oftentimes at wedding, there's some alcohol involved. And so people are, sometimes not on their best behavior. And a lot of people are out of town. It's almost like they're on vacation. So it feels like normal rules don't apply. So a lot of my photographer and videographer clients have terms in their contracts around that. Like what happens? Can you actually leave the event if it becomes, something that you are not comfortable with? So putting something in there around that to protect you. And again, it puts the people, the clients, the bride and groom or the family on notice that this is what you expect. This is your work environment and you expect people to act a certain way. Something that comes up with weddings a lot is the timeline. So these can be complicated events with a lot of moving parts. Oftentimes the photographer will work with the event planner or with the bride and groom or their family, whoever is kind of in charge, to set up a timeline for the day. So making sure you're clear on who is responsible for that and how you're all going to work together on the front end can be really helpful. Are they expecting you, the photographer or videographer, to kind of be running the show and making sure that things stay on time? Is someone else doing that? Who's doing the initial setup, all of that. And then I like to include a term that kind of gives you a little bit of an out, not an out, but if the timeline it gets totally off, and let's say you had timed the bride and groom's portraits, or the bride and bride, or the groom and groom. We are happy for all kinds of weddings here. Let's say that you had timed the portraits for sunset. And the timeline is totally off because it rained earlier in the day and so everything got pushed back, or the caterer was late, or who knows. I mean, things happen. So let's say you miss sunset. Sunset is not happening. I like to include some language in there that basically says, you're going to do your best to stick to the timeline. You're going to do the best to get the shots that you're planning. But if things happen that are outside of your control, that basically the bride and groom or whoever can't complain later if you didn't get the shots that they were expecting or hoping for. So timeline can be really important. Let's get to some just nitty gritty terms. So oftentimes with a wedding, it's a very long day. And so you want to ensure that you are getting meals and breaks. You want to put that in your contract. Any professional event planner is going to know that that is to be expected, but a lot of times you may be hired by a family and there is no event planner. And so this may be their first rodeo, their first time with an event like this. And so they may not know that. So you want to make sure that you are covered, that you're going to get fed, that you're going to get some breaks, you're going to have a little downtime. And where is that going to happen? Maybe that's built into the timeline, or maybe you just basically say like, hey, during the reception, I get 30 minutes to just not shoot for a little bit or whatever, between the getting ready time and the ceremony or whenever it makes sense. And then if you do any travel, and I find even if you're a pretty local photographer, sometimes you will go maybe an hour away. Maybe you have kind of a radius or a circumference around your home base that you're willing to travel, even if you're not considered like a destination photographer or videographer. So if you do offer even limited travel, I want you to include some travel and accommodation terms in your agreement. For example, I got married, it's been 11 years ago now, at a state park that is about an hour and a half from Chattanooga, called Fall Creek Falls. It's very beautiful if you haven't been there. And it's in a tiny little town, like there's nothing nearby. And so we hired a photographer out of Nashville. She was not really a destination photographer, but she was willing to travel a little bit. So, consider, do you want to do mileage? Are you, is the wedding going to go late enough that you would like to request a hotel room? Or if it's a multi-day event, what kind of accommodation do you want? If you've got a team that's coming with you, do you need multiple rooms? All of that should be spelled out in the agreement. And especially if you're a destination photographer, is your travel included in your price, or is that going to be extra? Kind of how is that all handled? Is the family or the client that's booking you paying for that, or are you doing it and you're going to be reimbursed, or is it a flat stipend? Again, there's many different ways that you can handle this. It's really up to you, but you want to spell it out in your agreement. And then because there is more money at stake, these are typically high dollar, very profitable, hopefully, engagements for you. So you want to make sure that you are protected with a little bit more robust legal terms than we would see in a mini session, which is maybe a couple $100. For, wedding, we're usually talking multiple thousands of dollars. And so you want to be well protected with a very clear refund policy, very clear cancellation, reschedule, all of those kinds of terms we want really clearly spelled out. If you are doing a payment plan, we want that really clearly spelled out. And we want some things that we might not see in the mini session agreement, like indemnification. So that means where the client is actually kind of acting as an insurance company. So let's say you've got a really fancy camera and a guest, is dancing wildly and knocks you over and breaks your camera. You could have a term in your agreement that basically says the client is responsible if your equipment is damaged, something like that. So we typically see more robust, more detailed legal terms in a wedding contract, just because, again, there's more at stake, there's more at risk for you and for the family or the clients, because there's more money at issue, and it's a longer day. There's probably more deliverables, more everything. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit. If you're doing branding shoots or commercial work, again, pretty much everything I talked about already is going to apply. So we're going to need all of those basic terms. Many of the same considerations as a wedding shoot are going to be for your branding or commercial shoot. Again, typically these are higher priced packages, higher priced engagements. It may be a multi-hour or multi-day shoot, depending on what you're working on. Especially for a catalog, it can be several days, or something like a book cover. Or a book. My clients being Boss, I think it was at least one day, it might have been 2 or 3, that they captured beautiful images that were used all throughout their book. So you need to be very clear about what you're offering, what you're getting into, what you're agreeing to. And with a commercial shoot or a branding shoot, because it is intended for business use, you want to be really clear about who owns the rights to everything, and if there are any limitations on how the client can use the photographs at the end of it, you want to spell that out. So for instance, if you, the photographer or videographer, want to maintain ownership of the images, maybe you want to use them elsewhere. Maybe you want them as stock footage. Maybe you want to license them as stock. You need to make sure the client is okay with that on the front end. You want to make sure if the client is only allowed to use them, let's say you do a shoot, but it's only intended for the images to be used on social media. You really are not wanting them to be used anywhere else. You need to put that limitation in your agreement. Could the client sell them as stock? any kind of use that you're not okay with, you need to think about and make it clear in your agreement. That ownership of rights is also very key. Often with a commercial or a branding shoot, the client is going to want to own the rights because it is basically an asset of the business. And if it's going to be incorporated into a product, especially, or something they're selling, they may want to register the copyrights to that larger work. So it's important that they know whether they own the rights to all of that. So a lot of the same terms we've already talked about, but the ownership and limitations around use become really important with a commercial or a branding shoot. And I should mention, again, we do have a contract template for each of these things that I've talked about. And we also have a bundle for photographers and videographers that's going to cover all of the things we've just talked about and the couple of other things I'm going to hit on before we wrap up. So I get a lot of questions about model releases. The good news is a model release can be very simple. I mean, the one that we have, it's a page. It is not complicated, but it has to have some really important things in it. So I don't recommend that you try to write this yourself or borrow your friends. You want to make sure you get a solid model release. This is what you're going to use anytime you are taking someone's picture that you would consider a model. So this could be a styled shoot. This could even be if you're maybe you're doing some free sessions because you're wanting to get some images to use on your website or to use in your marketing. Anytime that you're using an image that has someone's face in it, if it's the back of their head or if it's just a very distant, blurry image and you can't recognize them, you don't need a model release. But basically any other time, you need a model release. And this just is where the person who's in the image gives you the rights to use the image of their face recognizable. I like to include a little more detailed language that gives you the right to edit the image, that gives you the right to, sell it, to use it basically however you want. Not all models would be okay with that. So sometimes you may need to kind of edit that to the appropriate use that you're planning on making. But especially if you are hiring models for something that you intend to sell, if you maybe are creating a library of stock images that you're going to license or sell, that having the model release makes those more valuable for someone like me who's looking to license, because I want to make sure that it's totally clear to use. So model release is really important. And again, we have a template for that. Do not feel like you have to try and figure this out all by yourself. All right, we're going to talk about two more things. The next thing is if you are working with a second shooter. So maybe in the beginning, it's just you, you're solo, it's just you and your camera, or you and your video camera. But as you start to book bigger jobs, especially if you're doing weddings, you are going to probably find you need a second shooter, if not multiple shooters. So with working with other people, if they're creating creative works, they're creating copyrighted works. And if you are promising your clients that you are transferring the rights to them, or you're giving them permission to use the images or video in a certain way, you need to make sure you have permission from your shooters to actually do that. So you've got to be using an agreement with these second shooters. I know a lot of times it's a friend or a family member, and so it can feel very informal. Maybe they're just doing it for free, even to get some practice. Maybe it's a student or an intern. I don't care who it is. I want you to use an independent contractor agreement with them that will make sure that all the rights are transferred to you so that you can transfer or give permission to your clients. There's also important terms that you would want to have in there about how much you're paying them, any kind of work conditions, can they use the images on their portfolio? All of those things should also be in there. But the really important reason I want you using an independent contractor agreement is to make sure that you can live up to the promises you're making to your clients. What I don't want to ever see happen is, 2 years later, the second shooter gets mad at you about something and, starts to cause a fuss and says, well, I'm going to tell all your clients they don't have permission to use my work. It could be a real disaster for you. So we want to use an independent contractor agreement with our team, with our whole team, but especially with our shooters who are creating, creative work. Now, as your photography or videography business grows, my guess is maybe in the beginning it's word of mouth, or you're just advertising on social media, kind of telling people, spreading the word, but you will need a website at some point. It will probably be a beautiful portfolio website with lots of incredible images showcasing your work, giving people a sense for what they'll get if they hire you. And so with that website comes some legal requirements. You have to have a privacy policy. If you have any way to collect information from people who are visiting, so that means if you've got a contact us form, if you've got a schedule a call form, if you've got, sign up for our email list to learn about promotions or news, if you are taking even just a name and an email address, you have to have a privacy policy. It's required by law. So again, this is not something you should try and create for yourself or that you should copy from a friend. Go grab a template, whether it's ours or someone else's. Ours is great if you need one, but that privacy policy is required by law. And it's something you can set and forget. You can do it once and then you don't really have to look at it until there's a big change in the law again. But that is required by law. So you've got to have that privacy policy on your website. Now, especially for photographers, I highly recommend that you also have terms and conditions on your website. Now, this is not required by law, but this is where you have the opportunity to tell visitors to your website what they can do with your intellectual property. Can they copy your images? Can they share them to social media? Do they have to ask you? Could they, create a painting? Let's say you have some beautiful scenery or, more architectural or landscape type imagery on your website. Can someone create a painting from that? There's all kinds of things people want to do with images. So you want to have some rules and guidelines around that. You want to tell people that you own them and you want to tell them what you're okay with, what you're not okay with as far as people using them. And then your terms and conditions are a great place to put other maybe policies that you have, how to contact you, if you have booking policies or rescheduling or, any of that. That's a great place to put that to kind of give people a heads up about how you work. So your website terms and conditions, not required, but a good idea, especially because I see photographers get ripped off so much because everybody loves their images. Something for photographers that I want you to consider, and videographers as well, is adding watermarks. Now, I know this is kind of controversial. People have a lot of thoughts about watermarks. Not everybody loves them. And there are certain times when it's not a good idea to use them. So for example, if you're selling stuff on Etsy, Etsy does not like watermarks. So, there's instances where watermarks are maybe not the best idea. But if you have a photography website, I highly recommend adding watermarks. And if you're sharing things on social media, to add a watermark. So, and without being too obtrusive, put it in a place that is not that easy to crop out if people are, copying your stuff. I think watermarks are very effective. I know they make your images slightly less beautiful. But just from a getting ripped off, getting copied, having your images floating around the web with nobody knowing they came from you, that's the goal. We're on social media because we want to share our work with the world so that other people will hire us, right? Maybe you take images just for the fun of it, but most of us are, the social media and the website is really a marketing tool to get more clients. So I find watermarking can be very effective. All right, one more time before you forget, go to our website, go to the show notes for this episode and grab our 10-step checklist to make sure that your photography and videography business is totally legally protected. It is not that hard. That is the good news. It does not have to be overwhelming. I hope that, I never want to talk about all the things that can go wrong, but I hope that this episode has given you an idea of some things that you might want to think about, some tricky client situations, some issues that may pop up, so that you can put the right protections in place on the front end. If you've got a clear client agreement that you're walking through with your clients, you really should not have a lot of misunderstandings. Things can change and we may have to deal with, weather and rescheduling and, oh my goodness, nobody expected a pandemic. So, things happen. But if you've got a solid contract, you're on really good legal footing to roll with those changes, to deal with that when these things do come up. So head over to the show notes, awbfirm.com/podcast161 to grab your checklist. And I hope to talk to you guys again soon. I'll see you next week.